You are listening to the Growth Signal. My name is Alyssa Nolte,
And I'm Jill Axline.
and we're going to get right into it. Jill, what is your hot take?
Yeah, my hot take is that most customer insight work is basically theater. And what I mean by that is that I've seen firsthand companies interview, let's call it 8 to 12 people. They build a deck full of their quotes that they cherry pick for their strategy. And then everyone kind of pretends that we have deep understanding, particularly if it's then, validated within the four walls of the organization. And the truth is, it's not really an insight problem, it's a scale problem and it's a context problem. Like we're really needing to understand how the market is using methods that are not really keeping pace with how quickly business decisions move. And I think the next era of market research really belongs to at least methodologies, if not technologies, that allow you to see the audience in context and in real time so that you can test messages instantly. You can make decisions very clearly and not just based on vibes or what you heard a bunch of salespeople talking about. So I think ultimately looking at a different type of human intelligence might be a way to augment what we're currently doing.
I am really excited to talk about this because, full disclosure, listeners will know that I own a user experience and market research company, right? So when you're saying like, oh, most insights are much theater, a lot of my colleagues would immediately like start to bristle at that, but I have always been one who's very outside the box, and I can't say I don't disagree with you, because there have been so many times where I've had organizations reach out to me and they want a survey because they feel like they're supposed to. And, VP so and so from such and such department said, oh, well, we should do, this type of survey because my friend over at the other company did this type of survey. And I have actually turned down work before because there wasn't a clear plan or strategy of how these insights were going to be used and how they were actually going to drive strategy and make change. And it's it's almost like this attitude of, and I see the same thing in like those management consultants that they bring in, right? It's meant to be, and it's being treated as a cop out or a scapegoat or something we can blame rather than something we intend to use. And then your second point about like the speed of business, it is insane. Like the way we used to do business 10, 15 years ago was reasonable. It was fast, but it was reasonable. Today, it is just absolute utter madness all the time.
I agree. And I mean, if you just look at the geopolitical situation right now, at any given time, you could have a part of your audience, and I mean, like, not even knowing how you would segment it based on what your last strategy was, that's going to completely have a spread in the opinion from one side of feeling motivated to do something or purchase something to going entirely out of market because of what's happening. And so, trying to understand where that spread happens and understand it on a day-to-day basis, but also from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel. Because if something's topical, that difference of opinion is going to look very different than something that's closer to features, functions, and benefits that might align to our current assumptions about segmentation. So I just think segmentation is not static. And we kind of deal with it like it is. And I think there are lots of ways that you can slice and dice the market, but how do we really know that using traditional methods? I don't think we can.
And I think too, research in general has really evolved, right? And it's no longer good enough to just say, okay, well, my sample size needs to be 385 because some calculator I found on the internet says that based on my population and my incident rate, I have to, get to this number. Like, I've never been a fan of that because that assumes that we as human beings fit into this linear demographic driven approach to the world. And I don't know about you, but you and I might look exactly the same. We might have the same income. We might live in the same neighborhood, but the way we behave and think and experience the brands around us can be totally different and isn't just driven by who we are on paper.
Correct, like 1,000%. In addition to that, as I've seen AI come into the conversation where people create custom GBTs and they're like, you're a financial advisor, you live here and have this size book of business. I think doing that has that first party data that it's gathering then generate and predict what's the next word they'll say, but it doesn't really get into what is it that they're actually thinking and feeling that's driving the words they say or the actions they take. And so I think we have to be really disciplined from an AI governance perspective to understand what is being modeled here and what is this output? Is it inference or is it evidence driven? And what does it mean within the context of what it is I'm trying to do or decide?
And two, I want to key in on really two words that you use there, thinking, feeling to drive action. And I especially feel in I mostly work with B2B companies. I think we a lot of times forget that people who work at a B2B company are still people. Yes, they're buying something boring and their business is buying for their business, but like we are still consumers at the end of the day, regardless of what we are buying. We are consuming regardless, and that has thinking and feeling and as part of it. It doesn't matter what your price beat, how well you beat them on price or how many features you stuff in there. It's the way people think, the way people feel that drives action.
Right. And do they feel understood? And are they compelled to bring counter argumentation into what it is that you're saying? And that's often something where if you're establishing common ground or empathy in your message, you're going to reduce that counter argumentation with your audience. And that looks different depending on what it is you're talking about, and what's happening in the world around you, more than just what's in the person themselves, like their demographic or their psychographic.
Right. And
So I totally agree.
I'm not saying like toss demographics, right? We all need them as part of our segmentation, right? Like in my
Yeah.
customer segmentation, I'm going to have, their average annual spend and I'm going to have their company industry and their company size and all of those things. But that one dimensionality of the way we segment in, I'll call it the old days, because I really truly believe that we are moving into a new era of customer understanding. The one dimensional way that we have segmented our customers and made decisions based on those segmentations and the way we've approached it is one dimensional and will continue to be one dimensional unless you step into this new era. So let's get really specific and tactical. If we're kind of in wild agreement that segmentation has a long ways to go, but the future is there, how do we start to do insights that aren't theater and aren't performative and actually drive decision in this modern age that we're living in of instant response, super reactivity, and customer demand?
Yeah. And this was my big quandary. When I was at the last firm I was at, Morningstar, I built our market research team for central marketing because, again, like nobody was even asking the audience. And yet it was taking 6 to 8 weeks in field to get any sort of output. And so I was really scouring the market and going to conferences to understand what is the potential of AI. And this was like 18 months ago. And I saw somebody speak and they were talking about scanning LinkedIn profiles where they could create synthetic versions of people. And I thought, okay, well, I just talked to 15 financial advisors. Why don't I create synthetic versions? And those will start to evolve over time. Whereas that was a point in time that I did that focus group. I'll look for convergence and discrepancy across these two populations, the synthetic and the actual, and try to understand that difference. Um, and so I kind of shopped this around and I ended up being introduced to the co-founders of a company called Mavera, who were looking at this a little bit differently. They were maniacally focused on context. And so they were looking for signals from the environment so that they could really channel that context on a minute to minute basis. But then they were also aligned with how I was thinking, like in my doctoral studies, about what is the nature of empathy, what is the nature of perspective taking, and how does that factor into how we structure messages. And so they started to model that with a swarm of models and then use a governor to pull on different parts of that process, whether it's an emotional process or a cognitive one, to be really predictive of what the audience would say, and then put that against the backdrop of context. So, to get back to your question, I think augmenting the work that we do with real populations and then having this simulation that helps us to get closer to the mark of how people are thinking, feeling, and doing in any given situation, or be able to look at the news through the lens of an audience and understand how they're thinking, feeling, what they're assessing as risks, what they think the opportunities are, I can start to apply that to my day to day calculus on how I'm communicating with an audience, whether that's something that's today and completely ephemeral, and I'm pushing it over social, or something I'm building into a long tail campaign where I'm building a trend line of all those spotlight moments with that audience. So for me, when I was at Morningstar, I built a desktop asset manager. It represented the aggregate of the population. And as that data set started to surface entropy, so on any given question, how are you reacting to central bank policy? It would show me the spread of opinion. It would show me a confidence score. So, how well is this emulating the thinking and feeling of my audience? And then, what is the substance of that spread and where is it happening? So, is it happening at the firm type, role type level, or is it happening? Um, More specifically to do with how they're feeling about something, and how do I justify that? And then what attributes do I map that to in the context of, an ad campaign or social platform? So for me, it's starting to mine some of that information from the modeled audience with what it is that I know about the actual audience. I think kind of that's the next step.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible opportunity right now with AI, especially as it's really brought something to the table that we've never truly been able to do before. The ability to massively aggregate what we've learned over time and synthesize it in a way that we can understand it. Because I had a client reach out to me. God, it was a couple of years ago now, like really before AI was a hot button topic. And at that point, we had done like 400 primary research projects for them, like an insane number of projects. And they were like, so what would it take for you to tease apart every single project you've ever done for us and essentially put it into a knowledge base so that we can search it? Because I know we're repeating research that we've already done. And the only reason that we know that it's been done is because you've been around for 10 years and you're like, oh no, we already did that. Here's the report we produced a couple of years ago. And I said the sheer volume of time that that would take was going to be like hundreds of thousands of dollars just to synthesize all of this information into some kind of searchable database. Like, which audiences did we talk to? What were the demographics that we used to select them? What were the psychographics? What were the findings? What was the method? Hours and hours and hours of staff time to produce that. And eventually they were like, well, we can't invest $600,000 in essentially what is a spreadsheet. And so now with AI, that's so much more feasible, number one. But two, the ability to take that and see patterns that just human beings aren't going to be able to zoom in and see and extrapolate from. But I do want to ask you, when we bring in this AI and this synthesis, I can hear the listeners screaming at me as we're talking. How do we do that in a way that doesn't lose the humanity of what we're doing and prevents bias from coming in from ourselves, our own experiences, or the AI's model itself?
So I love this question. And it was one of my first questions too. In terms of humanity, I always think the AI can only take us so far until we actually have to go to the audience. So I think that's just what it is. I don't know that it's ever a replacement. I always think it's an augmentation. I think looking at models that are doing their best to emulate that human emotional process and actually test those against benchmarks in the academic community, which is something that Mavera did, and look at that across models, that at least helps us to get closer to the mark. But I would say the last thing is that decisions really shouldn't get ahead of evidence, right? And so many of these models are inferring a lot from what they're finding in first party data, adding a synthetic layer on top of that, which further, it makes a larger data set, but what's the coefficient in front of those data points to say how closely it emulates the audience? I think really having checkpoints in place, like governance checkpoints, and that's something that I really pushed, and our CTO agreed that having a hallucination risk metric, a confidence metric, a response stability, a test retest reliability screen, and compare that to other models that are on the market, it becomes really important so that we're not just taking that first output and saying, yep, that's the one. I also think having an adversarial layer so that it's not a sycophantic model, it's one that's going to push back and disagree and question your best thinking as the human who's, the wizard wielding the wand. I think then it becomes more of a collab and rather than kind of a one-way trust me situation that you get with a lot of models. And so I think that's really the difference. But I would still say and go back to how do we not lose the humanity? Well, let's just not lose the humanity. Let's make that part of the workflow. It's just this becomes something you can do up front that gets you to the starting gate with the best possible set of options.
I love the concept of the adversarial. I actually in my all of my AIs that I work with, the custom instructions I have in there, I have two custom instructions that I put in every single one. Number one is roast me if I deserve it. Number two is do not agree with me if I am wrong. And I will sometimes even push back on my AIs when we're like collaborating, and that's kind of how I think of it. And I'll say, "Am I right? Do you agree with me? Have I thought this through? Or are you just saying that because you feel like you want me to be happy?" And like sometimes I'll be like, "Oh no, you're right. I really should push back. Here's where you're stupid." And I'm always like, "Good. Tell me, like, fling me all the way through because I would rather be flamed by an AI chatbot than the entire internet." So it's definitely one of those things where building in that adversarial layer, I think, is really smart. I also love that you use the word augmented. I've been advocating for a while on this podcast about we have to stop calling it artificial intelligence and start thinking of it as augmented intelligence. Like, let's change the A because I am always the operator, but the intelligence is the tool. It's meant to augment me, not replace me, not synthesize me, like make me better, make me smarter, roast me when I deserve it,
Yep.
but it will never replace me.
I think that's 100% correct. At least for now. I mean, not a futurist, so I can't say
Fair.
what happens 5 to 10 years from now. But where we are today, and as people are adopting it, if you're not taking that level of like governance and um, just taking on the role that you ought to as the expert in whatever your field is, kind of missing the script.
So take us through like a real scenario of how someone might use this kind of augmented intelligence or synthetic intelligence extrapolation models in their business. How does it actually work and what kind of value can they expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I've always started with a general market sizing exercise, might run a SWOT analysis, might look at a trend analysis on something that I'm tracing over time. So, in the case of when I worked at Morningstar, I was looking at the convergence of public and private markets. And so I wanted to be focused on what could I say to be topical, but then also create a red thread that carries us A through the year but also B down to all of the various P&Ls because everyone has a different product set, probably slightly different audience, even if some of them are overlapping. And so whatever I'm saying at the brand level, the corporate level, has to render down the funnel. And so that same segmentation that everyone sets in October and September and maybe checks in on quarterly was not going to hold. And certainly our annual reports that we build around audiences are not going to take us through the year. So I'm constantly looking at channel preference. I'm looking at trend analysis around tent poles for our editorial strategy. I'm using it to really interrogate the audience as it pertains to what's happening in the news. And I'm looking again at that spread of opinion so that I can make the right decisions about how to bifurcate a message or generate an A B testing strategy or think about how to communicate through different content assets and types or through different channels. And all of that is something that's happening at the front end before I'm putting any money into market. And I think that's where the real value is that for pennies on the dollar of what I would have spent, and I had like a six-figure market research budget, I'm able to accomplish for pennies, really. And so that gives me a really good sense of the audience, how the audience is divided, what messages needs to go out to it, and then I can start to create. So then I'm working with experts in the tool, and those experts represent different subdomains of marketing and sales that help me create a strategy from what I know from my audience and operationalize it into tactics and then actually execute against the tactics and push them out across my MarTech stack. So from end to end, from the time that I'm gathering intel on the audience to creating a strategy that I can then vet with stakeholders. I mean stakeholders I've developed in the tool, and then actually create something that is easy to execute on and then push it forward using integrations. For me, having all of that helps me to bypass an FP&A team to understand large scale corporate data. Um, it helps me keep pace with what's happening across, in this case, it was seven P&Ls, and what does their product release schedule look like, and how does that align with my editorial strategy? It helps me maintain seasonality with my audiences. And so much of that is just something that usually would take huge teams to do. A lot of those teams would be siloed. Now we're all centralized and we're looking at the same thing, and we can all ask the audience the questions we want to from the different facets of our own expertise. So it's a consolidation. It's obviously a less expensive way to speak to an audience and have them be accessible immediately and on call. And then it allows me to really like guess and check and test and do that iteration strategy before putting money into the market. Um, and I've seen really incredible results both when I was in enterprise and now that I'm over with Mavera with different types of clients, whether they be agencies, founders who are looking for product market fit, marketers, obviously, because I speak their language and we can find very similar use cases. But it really does have an application for anyone that's using human intelligence in their decision-making process.
If someone is interested in learning more, connecting with you, where can they find you online?
Well, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn because I love talking to people, um, and just understanding what it is that they're grappling with. And then you can always visit Mavera.io, and there are free trials, no credit cards. So go kick the tires. I think we just want people to try it and take a look and kind of discover for themselves what it means to add this to their process.
Considering all of the people that you know or aspire to know, who else is out there? Who else are we supposed to be paying attention to?
I really, really like Annie Duke. I think for much of what she's putting out there, I think she's phenomenal on decision making under uncertainty. And I think that's a skill every business really needs right now. Everyone wants certainty, but I think you need to make high quality decisions with incomplete information all the time. And so, how do we kind of show up again to the starting line with the best possible um, decision criteria and evidence that we need to make those decisions? So I think Annie Duke is really putting like great content into the world around that.
Awesome. And you can find me at LinkedIn. Just search Alyssa Nolte. If you find the notorious plant killer, you know you have found the right Alyssa. You can also find me on Substack. You can search Alyssa Likes to Talk or grab the link down in the show notes. Jill, thank you so much for coming on the show today, really rethinking customer insights and customer strategy, not as a performative exercise, but as something we really do with intention and strategy and with the augmented intelligence and governance conversation. I think that's really important. But I also love that you're really helping to drive the future of customer insights and customer service intel. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.